Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Good
Good to
evening,
be here.
everybody.
Good evening, everybody.
I hope it's going out. Well, we made it. We had a little last minute snafu, but Dr. Rick's got his backup system running, so we're all good to go. And it's good.
Okay, these are groaners, just a few involving people and animals. Um,
Sorry. I was just thinking lions.
well, a scientist decided to cross a carrier pigeon with a woodpecker. They got a bird that could deliver the message and could knock on the door when it arrived.
Oh. All right.
By the way, we have woodpeckers in our little bird thing out our kitchen window. They're kind of amazing. They're like jackhammers. But anyway, that's another story. They hammer on our some of our stuff too, fences, but that's another problem. Anyway, two men were hiking in the woods. One man screamed, "Snake, run, snake!" The other guy laughed, said, "What are you being so afraid of? It's just a baby snake." He said, "What do you mean a baby snake? Don't you hear the rattle?" And this is one I like.
Uh,
It's corny, but I like it. This man is in the woods and he gets bitten by a rabid coyote. He doesn't get the shots in time, so he's laying on a floor in the house and he's foaming at the mouth and he's dying. And he
so
grabs,
funny.
asks his friend for a piece of paper and he starts scratching names on it. He says, "Are those people you want to give part of your estate to?" He says, "No, they're people I want to bite."
That's bad.
You can see why I like that one. I'm dying. I'm going to take it with me.
Oh man.
Well, uh, I know it's presumptuous for us to say that Daniel is maybe the most consequential book in the Bible, but there are things about Daniel that verify the Bible in overwhelming ways that astound scholars. And they want to keep saying, well, the Jews must have counterfeited it. But they had to make
Mhm.
many counterfeits as the centuries rolled on for it to have the kind of accuracy that it has.
Mhm.
And and I want to show you another reason why I believe it is the most consequential book in the Bible, or at least one of the most consequential. I know people say, well, what about? And then they rattle off, uh, you know, uh, maybe where Moses gave the law in Numbers or Exodus. But still, I think in many respects, Daniel's the most consequential book. It's the one that the scholars and critics can't handle. Um, and here's my one of the reasons why I think it's the most consequential that you might not think of. You know, we have spiritual warfare on this planet, but it's the only book in the Bible, as far as we know, where the spiritual world tried all they could to block it. And that to me tells you it's important. It would be like, um, well, there was the Germans had a big oil field that they captured from the Russians. I won't go into all the details, but it was for many years the biggest air target. America sent waves and waves of bombers to knock it out. The Germans sent many fighters to keep it going and slave labor to repair it when they knocked it out. I won't go into all the details, but the fact that it was the crucial target, and there was something like Rabaul in the Pacific, tells you how important it was.
Mhm.
So let's start the story of how the devil did not want Daniel to get the inspired information that he had. And I know and Daniel is inspiring it because of Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Um, and those are great things too. But I think it was the prophecies that the demonic world really wanted to stop. Um, And so we hope to do a 3 or 4 part series on Daniel. I believe the book of Daniel fits the flow of worldwide historical events in a way that is unbelievable if it were not inspired by deity. And
Yeah,
that's why,
doing some reading today, they went to whoever was writing went to a lot of trouble to try to date much of the prophecy of the book of Daniel to a much later time, like after the desecration of the temple, to try to do away with a lot of what is so amazing about it, I guess.
yeah, I understand that. By the way, there are several problems with trying to change the dates on Daniel. And by the way, Daniel will prove to be true even up until our times. We're going to get to that. If we don't get to it in this one, we'll get to it. We'll maybe hint at it, but we'll get to it in the part 2. But there are 2 problems. One is, just like with today, the Jews had more than one synagogue. Well, Ezra got the system started, but still, there was more than one copy of Daniel that existed. If you start messing with the copies, won't the other people say, wait a minute, that's not in our copy, you're adding to it? You see the problem?
Mm-hmm.
I know, like if we want to change the book of Daniel today, it would be impossible because there are millions of copies of it out there.
Yeah.
And granted, it was a smaller problem back in ancient days, but it still was a problem. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But also, the book of Daniel involves, I believe, 3 different languages. Starts off with original Hebrew, then there's a section where Nebuchadnezzar writes in Chaldean. Then you go back to the dialect of Hebrew that was used later by the Jews. And it's clear that Daniel is writing in the languages that he's dealing with. If someone were to do a counterfeit later, I had a linguist explain it better than I can. You would do it all in one language. You see the problem with that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm probably not explaining as well as he did. He did a great job of explaining it. And by the way, there are things in Daniel, like the one where there's the writing on the wall of Belshazzar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for years they said that proves Daniel's wrong. There's no historical record of Belshazzar in ancient history, except in Daniel's book. Would you believe it? Toward the end of the 19th century, they found hard documents to prove that Belshazzar was number 2 because I think it was his father or father-in-law, maybe his father-in-law, was number 1. He was out in the army fighting with the Medes and Persians, and he was running the city. Well, what does that prove? That proves that the book of Daniel could not have been written in later centuries because they didn't know Belshazzar's name. You see what I mean?
Nice.
Only
Yeah.
somebody who was there at the time could have known it because history lost that knowledge. I'm just saying there are problems with it, and it is a problem the world has trouble with. Well, let's look at, I believe if we understand the Bible, we're the most blessed people in the world. Can we look at Revelation 1:3, Ken?
Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written in it, for the time is near.
And I think if we can understand Bible prophecy in the book of Daniel, we'll be blessed. And I know there's actually even the scripture that says, don't feel so good about yourself because you're strong or you're rich. Feel good if you understand God. That's the most simple. And I know people probably would chuckle at that, but really that is a blessing. Let's do Psalms 119, Ken. And I know people probably yes, sir. At that, but really that is a blessing. Let's do Psalms 119, Ken.
Yeah, real quick. If in this verse it says those who hear the words of this prophecy. If you go to the concordance and you look up the meaning of that word "hear," if you go down far enough, it means understand. Not just hear, but understand. And it's possible that it's not all understood at this time because it says that time is near. I don't know if 2,700 years maybe qualifies as near, but I think
you don't want to make any guesses about the end there, Ken? You don't want to
more understanding is there.
go way out on a limb or anything?
Psalms
you know,
119. Moving right along. So shall I have an answer for him who reproaches me? For I trust in your words, so shall I keep your law continually forever and ever.
and I want to focus on I trust in your word. I think we can trust in the book of Daniel. The critics are frightened by it because they can't explain it away. But the book of Daniel can give us confidence, historically verifiable confidence that the Bible is really the inspired word of God. Because I know right now, higher education, nobody, you know, they actually try and make fun of Bible thumpers.
Mhm. Yeah, the Bible as history or even is not taken overly seriously anymore. I mean, despite how often it's been substantiated and what a wonderful and cohesive record it is, it's still dismissed.
By the way, just for the record, I don't know all the details, but we got this from the archaeology magazine. The Jews have moved into more and more parts of East Jerusalem. I guess they bought them, the territory, and they've been digging in what's called the city of David, which is kind of attached to Jerusalem, eastern side. And they've been finding iron documents, because they're metal, they didn't dissolve in all those centuries, that verify David and some of the later kings, the names of the office holders, and and those pieces of metal and rock are verifying parts of the Bible. And quite a few things have come out in the last 2 or 3 years. And the archaeology magazine has it, but the world doesn't pay, the general world doesn't pay much attention to it because they don't want to.
Yeah, nothing that would make even just the physical record true about these people that it talks about lived. If that much is true, well, then the rest of it follows, I suppose, if you can believe it.
So my theory is the adversary wants to block out us understanding Bible prophecy. It's encouraging, and it proves to us that following the Bible is the right thing. I know everybody wants to follow man's wisdom and all the smart people and all their great theories. But when you look at it, it all looks good on paper when they say it, but it all turns to mess. Matter of fact, every revolution except for the American Revolution turned to blood. Really, French Revolution, Russia. I get rattled off all kinds of new ideas. The unintended consequences end up being bad, including the things they're pushing now. If the far left gets everything they want, it's going to be bad for society. I guarantee you. Man thinks he's smart. I'm not saying we don't have high IQs. A lot of people have high IQ, but that doesn't mean they're right. Okay, let's go to Daniel 10:6, please, Ken.
His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves.
So Daniel gets this great spiritual revelation. The thing that I find most interesting about it is the very next verse, this powerful angel tells Daniel almost an unbelievable story that from the moment he prayed, he started what they call the Daniel fast, it's water and unpleasant vegetables for 3 weeks, and had a great repentant prayer in chapter 9. From the moment he started his prayer, that God would remember the 70 years and restore Israel, God heard his prayer, but he could not get the message. Let's go to verse 12, please, Ken.
Do not fear, Daniel, from the first day that you sent your heart to understand and to humble yourself, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the later days.
Isn't it unbelievable that over Daniel's head, the powerful angels who were running the world empire at that time blocked the angel that was bringing the message to Daniel, blocked it. And here's the thought. How do you think, we think that, well, Einstein said that matter was just energy slowed down. That was the EMC thing, which proved true. If you can release the energy in matter, you get this great explosion, A-bomb. Well, if the spirit world is more real than we are, maybe they are more pure energy, whatever that looks like. And I think of angels fighting. Well, if they're energy, maybe they had something like a laser sword full of powerful energy. I don't know. Is that
sorry when you said laser sword?
Okay.
Not that I don't think that's possible. It tickled me in the moment. Laser sword. Yeah, it sounds totally great.
But they were fighting,
yeah.
and God's powerful angel could not get through.
It's an interesting window into this conflict that we don't see a whole lot of, or maybe think a lot about. Mr. Griffith spoke on a similar topic this last Sabbath here in Tyler's. It was really quite good. A few other things like in Job, or when you see or in the reference in Jude to disputing about the body of Moses or something like that, where there are these events transpiring around, and you may only see the outcome and not know what came before.
No, the devil is actively trying to checkmate God. If you look at it that way, he's actively trying to checkmate God. And it really is. I'm not saying that God isn't powerful enough. He will win in the end. I don't have any doubts about that. But he's allowing the devil. Well, if you read the Bible carefully, this is really the devil's society. I mean, God can do anything he wants, don't get me wrong, but within that parameter, the devil is really running a lot of this world. That's why it's so evil. And God, at least for the moment, has allowed that. So the devil is really checkmating. He's trying to checkmate God's church, and most of all, he was checkmating the prophet Daniel. And when you read the story, we don't have everything, on slides, but when you read it, the angel had to call for an archangel, the archangel that stood for the nation of Israel. I guess he has the power to check Satan. He's that powerful. And I guess Satan's an archangel too, to break through to get the message to Daniel. But even then, it wasn't easy. Doesn't that kind of amaze you?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that tells me that this was a meaningful prayer, and the devil did not want Daniel's prayer to get through. And most of all, he didn't want the prophetic answers to be out there in writing for us to read. He tried all he could to block it.
Didn't want that to be preserved.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure he probably worked. By the way, when you there's a course that I took at Big Sandy about the preservation of Scripture. I'm sure the devil probably tried to block that too, or pollute it, but couldn't. But he would if he could have. Don't you believe that?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
What you said earlier about multiple copies, I think that's an interesting. I mean, when you're thinking about the times where every copy of a book has to be made by hand, and it's laborious, and there's possibility for things to get lost or stated differently. I remember reading about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I believe it's the scroll of Isaiah, which is also in metal, if I'm not mistaken, like some of the fragments you were discussing. And they claim that it was in over 90% textual agreement with the big three. They call them the big three different translations of the Bible, the Vaticanus and something, or the Septuagint and something else. I'm not probably as up on that as I should be. But 90% textual agreement, I mean, that means like word for word, not even the essence of what it's trying to get across, but verbatim, word for word, over 90% is huge. Is a huge, not only for the three to match to begin with, but for that to turn up, in the less than 100 years ago and to still match the ancient copy. That's a huge deal. And did we just lose Dr.
Yeah,
Ricks
he
right
froze
then?
up. He's on his
Okay.
backup PC, and I have no. Hopefully, if it hasn't been started for a while, it's Windows is probably doing its thing in the background and messing up. So hopefully he gets
Well,
back. But
well, if we have to keep this going without him, it might get a little awkward here, Ken. Just me and you.
just a little bit. Well, we've done it before, so.
Okay.
You know, one interesting thing is he mentioned archangel. I'm just burning time till he gets back. But you know, the Bible only names one archangel,
Really?
and it doesn't say how many there are.
I've heard that before, the reference to Gabriel and then Michael and Lucifer says archangel, but that there it doesn't really place any limitation. But you say it only says arch in one spot.
I don't know. It only names one. It names Michael, but that's the only one it names. Now, this verse we read a minute ago said one of, so that leads one of the chief angels. It says chief, which you assume is also arch because arch means the chief angel. So it's possible that there are more. It's also possible that there's just Michael, but it doesn't give us a number. Just a little side note. So it looks like Dr. Ricks is rebooting his PC because we just lost him on my end. So hopefully he gets that back up and running. I'm going to bring up the notes here real quick. Maybe not that. Yeah, we're on Daniel 9:20. Yeah, and the next where he was going next was the answer to Daniel's prayers. How crucial they are. Daniel's deep repentant prayer for all of God's people was significant. He asked when would Israel's banishment end, and he repented officially for the people. God had to send an archangel to break through the spiritual blockade and answer his request. Now, that is 9:20. Yeah, that's where we're at now. So I'll read.
That's interesting. You know, we're called words.
Well, what's fascinating to Yep, also shows you the power that Satan and his demons actually have. That they could hold back Gabriel. Mm-hmm.
Maybe don't stop praying.
Always. I'll read Daniel 9:20. It says, "Now while I was speaking, praying, and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel before the Lord my God, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me." Yep, and yep, and the fact that Satan was trying to do everything he could to prevent this, just like he did everything he could to prevent Christ from being born. Every step of the way, he's been foiled in trying to prevent God's plan. I'm seeing if I can get him back here real quick. It's not happening. Well, all right. We'll move on to Daniel. Where are we at? 9:24.
All right. Well, if he
Well, he's trying to get his. My guess is he hasn't started his system up for. This is a backup system, and you know how Windows is. He's probably got 300 security flaws and everything else, and who knows what over. And it probably just auto rebooted on him. Who knows? Anything's possible with these Windows machines. No, it doesn't care. It just does what it wants to do. That's why I just don't like Windows. But I have to use it for this, so we're stuck with it. All right, let's look at Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks.
Yeah, and the note says here that his
Right, and as time marches forward, it seems to me that the world that we live in, the technology and the times and the way the countries and the leaders are moving and all the things that are happening as they move forward, you can see how prophecy, I would say, how it becomes possible based on what's happening in the world. You know, before a certain date, it would be almost impossible to prevent people from buying and selling.
oh yeah.
Now it's possible.
Yes.
And there's many other Yeah, and you know, back then and nowadays, I mean, it would be a switch, a physical switch. You could flip and boom, you're done. Yeah, we got you back, Dr. Ricks.
Okay, good.
All right, we are
Okay,
at Daniel. We moved down your notes a bit, and right now we're parked right around Daniel 24 and 25.
Okay, I got you. The restoration of Israel.
Yes, Daniel
But
9,
keep
24,
talking. I don't want to interrupt whatever you were saying.
No, we're ready for you to intercede
Well-
here and bail us out. So
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I think we were right at the Daniel 10:11 scripture. I think we had done 9, 24, and 25 and spoke about it a little bit. And
Yep.
man, we
Well,
weren't feeling
part
good,
of-
Dr. Ricks, but we were going on anyway.
Yeah, that's well. I'm sure you did a great job. The one thing about Daniel to remember is that that prayer was for the reconciliation of Israel, and I believe because of His great Spirit, God listened to Daniel, and it came across the way it should have come across. God was very pleased with Daniel, And and was in the process of beginning to start to restore Israel. By the way, it appears that the last part of Daniel was written in, I'll get these dates right, 535 BC. And that's when the first set of exiles, or shortly after, got permission to come back. And you'll say, why didn't Daniel come back with them? He was 84.
Very old.
And here's what the commentaries say. The logic for Daniel was that was a tough trip, 4 months of walking. I mean, mostly donkey walk. It's tough. He couldn't do it, but he would be better off to stay at the headquarters of the Persian Empire and try to be a positive influence there than an old man that couldn't barely make it. So he never got to see Jerusalem again. But when they got there, it was all in ruins anyway, so he didn't miss a lot in that contextual sense. But his prayer was really important in the restoration of Israel. But also in part of that, it was the restoration of the Messiah, his first coming and his second coming. It's all kind of bound up together, and you can see why it's so important. Did you read Daniel 10 and 11 yet?
I don't think so.
Here we
Would
go.
you read that, please, Ken?
Yep, here we
pick
go.
it up from there.
And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling.
Can you imagine seeing a powerful archangel with all that, whatever it is, glowing energy and power? That must have been something.
Now he passed out a couple times, didn't he? Black out, and he got to get raised up, and then it kind of sounded like he blacked out a second time, and
And I think
everybody else ran away.
Yeah, they're all scared to death.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit similar to the call of the Apostle Paul. Everybody felt the power and ran away. Paul's the only one that really clearly heard the voice. Maybe they heard a booming noise, but there's similarity. Everybody. I saw this on. Actually, I saw it on another show, but they were showing the bad attitude. Colbert, and I think it was Oprah, were kind of ridiculing God, like, "Oh yeah, God, how come this?" And they had a guy with an old beard and a cartoon suit playing God, and it was so disrespectful. And I said to myself, by the way, Colbert is Jewish; he should know better. But liberal Jews are really, some of them are way out there. But at any rate, if you really saw God or a powerful angel, you wouldn't be making fun or cracking jokes.
Yeah.
No, you'd be lucky to keep breathing.
Yeah, you'd be messing in your pants and knees wobbling. You know what I mean.
I was trying to restrain myself from making a dirty pants joke.
But yeah, I mean, you would be, in every example in the Bible, people are scared spitless.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, when God spoke to the children of Israel through a dark cloud in the mountain and the earth was shaking, it was so scary to the people. They said, "We don't want to hear from God anymore. Moses, you go talk to him and tell us what he said."
Yeah.
That gives you some idea. And they didn't actually see anything but just a bright light and on the top of a mountain covered with smoke. But the voice so scared them. And I guess the earthquake too. But at any rate, this was quite something.
There's nothing on earth, obviously, that can compare to that. But if you've ever been to a drag race with Top Fuel dragsters and sat in the stands, when those Top Fuelers go by with them 3,000 horsepower engines, it feels like they're driving through your body. It just rattles your brain. And it just kind of takes your breath away, especially if you've never experienced it before. It's kind of a tiny little peek into what that much power does to your mind or your body. It just tears you up when it goes through you. When it drives down the track, it's just unbelievable power.
Yeah. And so you can imagine what it was like. And Did we read Daniel 10:11 already? I can't remember. We were going to read it.
Yes.
Yes. Trembling.
We're at 927.
Okay. But Daniel was greatly beloved. And Daniel's prophecies are a veracity of the Bible. It proves that the Bible is true. He foresaw many events in the future that cannot be explained away, that he wasn't inspired by deity. 927. Let's go ahead and read that one.
Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate.
This is the famous 70 weeks prophecy, or parts of it, which I know we talked about several years ago in another podcast. But the whole essence of the 70 weeks prophecy is it's 2 parts to it. When would the Messiah come the first time, and when would the Messiah come the second time? And once they got, you can argue 1 or 2 years depending on where you start to count from. But when they end up the 69 weeks, when you do it all a day for a year, from the day that it was issued, it comes down to the ministry of Jesus Christ. 31 or 32 AD, depending on who you read. But that's an amazing. You realize that that's 5 centuries, a 5-century jump. And people will say, well, how could Daniel do that? And obviously there are many copies of Daniel out long before Christ. They may even had a copy of Daniel probably in the synagogue in Galilee where Christ was raised. They were probably all over the place. And Daniel nailed down when Christ's ministry would start. It's amazing. Now and he did die in the middle of the week too. But then the tough part is you got that 3.5-year period to the end, and that's the part that people are all speculating about. But notice the latter part. By the way, historical thing was he also predicted the desolation of the temple. And in 168 BC, over 3 centuries from Daniel's time, almost 3.5, Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple. And it's an interesting story. Let me give you a little historical backdrop to it. And all throughout chapter 10, Daniel emphasizes the king of the north and the king of the south, north of Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem. They swung back and forth every 20 years or so, fighting wars back and forth, back and forth. At one point, the king of the north looked like he was in a position to defeat the king of the south, and a Roman fleet shows up, which is also, we'll see that in Daniel 11. And the Roman general makes a circle around Antiochus, of course, backed up by Roman legions and his fleet, and says, look, you don't step out of this circle until you agree to do what we say. Totally humiliated him. Basically, the Romans, it was a process, but Rome kind of came into that part of the world and said, hey, we don't like all this internal fighting between the king of the north, king of the south. We've come to bring peace. Oh, they call it Pax Romana. What it meant was ultimately Rome took over, and those guys end up being replaced. But they did bring, world trade, peace and order, and all that sort of thing. And so when Antiochus Epiphanes, he really was a low man, which Daniel mentions. After being turned back by the Roman Empire, humiliated, as he goes through Jerusalem, he decides to take vengeance, and he works with some backstabbing priests, and they end up desecrating the temple. And that sets off the Maccabean War, which is a great part of Jewish history. But Daniel had many of the details far in advance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really interesting story. That's an interesting section of history. I read a little bit of that today, and the priesthood and Antiochus was like intriguing with he set up his own high priest that was friendly to what he wanted to do, and so there were factions in there, and that was interesting. But yeah, statue to Zeus or Jupiter, Olympus, however you want to say it, sacrifice a pig, desecrate everything, and that's the whole feast of the dedication. The Hanukkah was the cleansing, the rededication of the temple right afterwards.
By the way, it's interesting that he was able to corrupt some of the Jews.
Yeah.
And they kind of worked against their own God or their own religion. I wonder, I realize this is pure speculation, but Judaism has major divisions. But I'm told one reason the Jews haven't even really seriously worked at building the temple, because roughly half the Jews don't want it.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Or they don't feel it's worth the trouble that it would cause.
Would cause huge problems, obviously. Yeah.
It's not worth the trouble. It's like the Jewish people, I noticed this a couple years ago. They were against Netanyahu the same way American liberals against Trump. It was like they were both in the same spirit. I can't explain it. Netanyahu was very patriotic. They're more liberal. It's like the nation of Israel is divided, and Satan is taking advantage of the division. Those who want to be patriotic and reasonably want to follow God, and those that don't. And I wonder, is that same pattern going to be seen at the end time?
That's always struck me about the Gospels, the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. I mean, the idea that the high priests or the rulers of the temple, the Sadducees, wouldn't even go so far as to believe in the spirit realm. It says, like in Paul, like they didn't believe there was any angel or anything. And so if somebody had a vision, they said bunk. Well, I've always struggled to fit that with, for instance, the book of Daniel here, when you have these accounts that clearly deal with that sort of thing. What were they dismissive of that? Or, how did the viewpoint that was totally opposed to that, how did that end up on top? Or unless it was just to protect their own, if there can be no vision, if there is no angel or no intervention, well, then there can't be anything to rock their authority because it's all settled. And so, stay away.
Yeah, we might call them progressive or liberals today. But it's amazing. And I wonder if that same division could be exploited by the evil world, both in America and in Israel over in the Middle East. I guess, obviously, we have no idea. But sometimes history repeats itself, including bad things, especially bad things.
Especially bad things.
Yeah, I mean, really, because human nature is the same and the devil is the same, right?
Yeah.
Same players are involved.
Same playbook.
Yep.
So we shall see. Let's. By the way, for those who don't like to believe in the book of Daniel, you can't be a Christian and not believe in Daniel, because Jesus gave credibility to the book of Daniel. Let's go to Matthew 24, please, Ken.
And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand.
When we get to that part, probably another episode or two, when the final dictator, the beast, whatever other title you might give him, when he does put himself in that temple, showing himself that he is God, and whatever all he does, it'll be a desecration of the temple. They might even put pig's blood and another statue of Zeus or himself in there, just like the original bad guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. By Epiphany means, really elevating himself to high levels of, that shows his arrogance. Well, this guy will arrogantly put himself as God. When that happens, we'll be on the countdown to the return of Christ. And there are two sets of dates, and we can talk about that when we get into another episode or two. And some people will say, well, there's no temple now. We got to worry about it being desecrated. Do you realize that when Daniel made his prediction about the desecration of the temple, there was no temple then either?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I didn't actually think of that until a few weeks ago. I was thinking about all this, and it dawned on me. Daniel did his writing between the first and second temple. And the second temple wasn't built right away. It was a long struggle with local opposition that stalled them for like 20 some years. And Daniel was long gone before the second temple was built. So he didn't get to, there was no temple when he wrote it. That's my point. He knew another temple would be built, and he knew it would be desecrated. Interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I had never thought of that until reading this, that when he wrote it, there wasn't a temple either. So if you think that's a problem, well, it's already been rebuilt and desecrated, torn down, since then. There's no reason that can't happen all over again.
Now, I realize building a temple is difficult than building a skyscraper, but construction things are so much better than they were in ancient times. They could build that temple probably in 7 months. Maybe a little special work here and there, but
or less.
Or less, because I've seen them build 7 or 8 story buildings in this town, and it seemed like they went up in 6 or 7 weeks. Now, maybe I'm exaggerating, but they put those tall things that move all those girders around, and it's there before you know it.
Mm-hmm.
The methods they use now, if they just need a matter of manpower and machinery, they could put stuff up extremely fast. You see them big hotels they build go up. You know what they're made out of mostly? Did you ever watch them build one?
Mm-mm.
Only a little bit.
Big chunks of styrofoam.
Wow.
They're steel framed and styrofoam. And then they put stucco over the top of that. It goes up fast.
I've seen these panels and stuff that you can buy. I read some about construction. You can buy, it's called SIPs, styrofoam insulated panels, and you get them in big sheets, and they fit together, and zap, and you're done.
They could have everything produced off site and bring it in and set it in place modularly. Time is not an issue.
Yeah, and I suppose to get better insulation with all this new styrofoam, right? Well, I always worry about breathing all that stuff, but I guess we shouldn't worry. They know what they're doing, right? You say that anyway. Yeah, so it can be up fairly quickly if the powers to be want it to be up. And so when it happens, once there's a temple, really there are 3 things that we need, well, maybe 4. America has to decline as the great power in the world.
I don't know how that could happen.
We look so incredibly on the upswing, right?
Yeah.
I heard a guy was kidding. He was joking, but he kind of meant it. He says, China is building up their army and navy in numbers and toughness, while our military numbers are going down.
China has the biggest blue water navy on the planet.
Isn't that amazing?
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
Do you know there was a time, this goes back probably to the 1880s and all the way up to World War II, where Britain and America, but mostly Britain, but America too, worked together. We would not allow what we would consider the challengers to the world order to get a bigger navy. The Germans started building tons of battleships, so did the Japanese, and they played games with some of the rules about. But if they did, the British just built more. The Americans, we would never allow what we might call the bad actors to have a bigger fleet because they saw the danger in that. How come we don't seem to see that anymore?
Oh.
Just a thought, right? I know you're going to say things are different now than they were then.
Hopefully they have something super strong and super secret.
Well, they do claim that our new stealth bomber is so good, they've flown it over China and the Chinese radar didn't pick it up.
Oh, really? That new B-21 or something, is that what they're calling it? Spaceship-looking sucker.
One that I don't even think it flies yet. Isn't it just a model and that's what they're going to build? I didn't think it was actual.
It's very, yeah.
Maybe it's the previous model
prototype. I think
was
it's
so
a
stealth that they can't. But my only problem with things like that, if you notice, America has a hard time keeping secrets.
well, no kidding. You know what? You know what's funny is we could if our presidents didn't sell technology to people like the Chinese, and our presidents didn't drop drones in the desert so the Iranians could pick it up and copy it. Yeah, we'd be better off if they didn't do those things. You know, we could probably keep it secret then. Or we didn't have Chinese spies taking nuclear secrets and dropping the hard drives behind a Coke machine at one of the nuke plants back when Clinton was in office.
Yeah, that's all
So-
pretty well documented, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's no secret. I mean these people did all
Yeah.
this stuff, and our presidents allowed it.
And even if we still have some advantages, how long can we keep those advantages from them finding out?
Yeah,
And our manpower is declining. People are joining. And I think, but how many years will it take for America's military to decline? One thing to remember, there was a time when the Russian army was a formidable thing. I mean, I realize they're not that formidable now. And it seems like somewhere in the late 80s, Russia's economy and other problems increased, and all of a sudden, people were acting up in Eastern Europe, and thousands or hundreds of Russian tanks didn't roll in. The Russian army had lost something. I don't know how to explain it, but somewhere in the 80s, maybe in early 90s, the Russian military lost its at least for its. I know they still have a lot of atomic weapons, but otherwise they lost their oomph. They just disintegrated. Or could America military decline in 3 or 4 years like that?
I'd rather not see it happen, but I guess we'll find out.
Or it might take longer than that. But that's one thing that probably has to happen. Secondly, we have to have a great united military power in Europe. By the way, you probably know Germany has doubled its military spending. Japan also doubled their military spending. Now, if they next year doubled it again, and Japan next year doubles it again, and the next year after that, they double it again, and America is in decline. Matter of fact, Secretary Austin is complaining to Congress that our military will fall behind if they don't want the same amount of money they got last year, continuing resolution. They want more. And he says, we got to get more. I'm not sure how they're spending all that money, but that's what he says. Just something for you to worry about, right? And the third thing we need is a temple in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Once all those things are in place, and a king of the south, but that could come together fairly quickly, couldn't it?
Yep, it could.
Yeah, I think so. In some of this reading about Antiochus and stuff that I did today, I thought it was interesting that he went down and he fought against the Ptolemies in Egypt and all that, and he took a lot away from them, including control of Judea. That was a relatively recent thing, and that the Ptolemies had been tolerant. They'd allowed the Jews autonomy, and so on and so forth. Well, Antiochus came in there and he reduced them severely, but he left them, their capital. He left them Alexandria and Memphis, or left them some autonomy as well. And, so things kind of stayed the same. It's not like the Ptolemies were out of power, but power shifted severely. They lost territory. They lost control inside of their own thing. And then it's a brand new situation in Judea, which is the part that we're mainly concerned with. I just thought that was compelling because, you assume that, Greece has always been in charge of this area, and it's not. That represented like a major and recent shift in what was in the situation on the ground, if you will, I guess, there in Judea.
And Antiochus Epiphanes was a loathsome man. You read all about his background, sort of like Hitler, and probably the final dictator. If you really get to know him, I'm sure he'll have a great public image, but if you really got to know him, he's probably a loathsome, evil man too.
Yeah,
it fits, right?
It does. Character.
Yeah. Let's read Daniel 10:20. Please.
Then he said, "Do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed, the Prince of Greece will come.
Now, remember, this is probably 440, all the way down maybe 435 AD. Greece was not a up-and-coming world power, wasn't even all that in the area. How did Daniel know that Greece would be, after the Persian Empire, which was just getting started, after it was defeated, it would be by the Greeks? You know, he could have guessed that the Persians would come in, they're going to be in for a while. You can say, well, okay, that would be logical. But how could he predict the Greeks, which would happen around 330 BC?
Mm-hmm.
That's almost 2 centuries after Daniel. How could he know that?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mean, that's...
And the only reason he knew is because God revealed it to him. And Alexander the Great, well, we can get to some of that later, because there's a lot more when we get into other episodes, because there's a lot of history in that. One of the things that I thought interesting, if Daniel pictures the sweep and scope of world history, I think most people don't realize that Daniel reveals the grand sweep of world history. And then another thought occurred to me. Are they intentionally, systematically downgrading teaching of history?
They don't teach much of anything in history anymore. It's terrible.
My experience with history was hard. In school, I didn't care for it overly much. The memorization of dates, it just never came easy to me. I didn't feel like I don't feel like you really get a scope for how things actually transpired or anything when you're just forced to remember, well, this happened on this date and then there was a battle there, and like, I don't know where these places are, I don't know anything about these people or their customs, or whatever it may be. And so it's so far away. And I don't know, I guess into high school and into college, that's most of my history experience, with some exceptions that are, struck my interest at the time. It just didn't resonate.
History is one of those
so
things. History is one of those things you almost have to have a passion for, or a teacher that has a passion for it. Because that'll drive you. That should drive you to want to drink in as much of it as you can. But yeah, I had some history teachers that were not the best, and they'd catch me napping all the time. And I had some teachers that really held my attention. That makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's getting worse. I remember, and it might have been 20 years ago, University of Texas, it could have been longer than that, said we will no longer teach Western civilization. And at the college I used to teach at, it used to be required. Then it became a course that you could choose if you wanted to, but it didn't really do anything for you. And the guy that taught it we had some long, interesting conversations, Mike. And we used the same classroom. For some reason, I'd come in and hear him playing something from the 1930s and Hitler, or from the 1880s. But I would maintain that you can't understand the modern world if you don't know Western civilization. And you can't understand the full scope of the world history if you have no ancient history. And it would appear to me that very few people, college or high school, get Western civilization taught anymore, get ancient history taught anymore, and probably a whole bunch of other medieval history. And I see these. You ever seen these things where Jesse Water goes on the beach? A lot of them are college students on spring break, and he'll ask stupid questions like, "Who fought the Civil War?" or "Who did America fight to get its independence?" You seen any of those?
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah. It's as bad as who's buried in Grant's tomb. It's just terrible.
And literally, I've heard him ask questions like that, and the kids still couldn't figure it out.
Nope.
What you said about the history courses, that's compelling. I've been through a history of Western civilization course, and it did start anciently. I mean, it started back in Babylonia and all that, but a lot of it is religious. I mean, it pulled heavily on Judaism and the influence of Christianity. It's inescapable that you're going to get a lot, and you're going to be told like these are the foundational principles and things like that. That doesn't jive all that well with the narrative anymore. So that's interesting that that's the kind of thing that they're phasing out. They're reducing to a less important role.
I still remember grade school going over Greek history, Roman history.
Really?
They taught us all about the Greek theology and all the stuff from the Greek gods and all that. That was in grade school. I thought they're taught any of that now. I think that they probably just breeze over some key points and.
Yeah, we got a smattering of that in high school, and I think in English it was considered literature.
We had that in history class.
Somebody's mythology.
Yeah, we had all that mythological stuff. It was all in grade school.
Yeah. What Ovid? Can't read that in school.
I think
you shouldn't read that at all. That's bad.
I think it's so bad now that even the teachers are so miseducated themselves that they don't even know what they it's like, we're not going to teach them this because we don't want them to know it. They're so out of it now, they don't even know what they don't know anything themselves.
The only thing they teach them is narrative history. Anything that fits their narrative, they'll teach from a twisted point of view to drive home a certain narrative. I don't know. It's my guess. I don't know. My children went to school. They were lucky. They had a teacher that was passionate about Civil War and really drove home the Civil War and made it enjoyable. So they got that bit. If somebody asks them who fought in the Civil War and who won, they'll know.
That's good.
That's the key. Well, if you want to say that's Lincoln and the war, one of the keys to American history, like George Washington. But anyway, you'd be amazed. My point is, if you have Daniel gives you the sweep of world history from Babylon to the Holy Roman Empire at the very end. And a lot of this is future, maybe 5, 6, 7 years in our future. Daniel will be proven to be right. By the way, one more thing. At the end of Daniel, it talks about, I know there are different ways to interpret it, but he talks about travel will greatly increase and so will knowledge. Now you got to remember, he lived in the ancient world. How did he know? And now we live in a world where if you got the money, you could go to LA, New York, Chicago, maybe even Nashville, jump on a jet aircraft or Dallas, and you could be in the heart of Europe in whatever number of hours it takes. Or you could be in Australia, halfway around the world, just like that.
You can drive halfway across the country in 36 hours. I mean,
yeah.
It's big. It's covering a lot of ground, even if you're not in a plane.
Yeah, we take it for granted because it's always been a part of our lives, but that's unique in history. That's unique to this last 100 years or so. I mean, there's nothing like that.
Yeah, the average Joe has his own car. He can go anywhere he wants to go, anytime he wants to go. And your cell phone, smartphone, has more data in it than probably a major library. I mean, a big, big, big library.
Oh, it's way more than it can hold all the libraries on the planet Earth thousands and thousands of times over.
And any Joe can have one, and many do, all over the world. You talk about knowledge increasing, and the number of books written. I guess it's something like doubling every year or 2 or 3. It's a whole bunch all the time. Now, a lot of them may be garbage, but there's still a lot of science knowledge and stuff in there too that we just don't know how to use it rightly, I would say, in this world. But how did Daniel know all that?
Yeah.
Because God told him.
Yeah.
And the only logical answer you could come up with. Let's read Daniel 2:40.
And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others.
Now we know that was the Roman Empire, and it later became the Holy Roman Empire. There's a lot we could say about that, and we will be in the future episodes if these computers don't mess us up. I'm joking, but anyway, we'll get it fixed, I'm sure. Um, and then he predicted the greatest prediction of all, uh, the Christ kingdom coming. Let's read that last scripture, Daniel 2:42.
And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever.
Like the fairy tale, they lived happily ever after. Well,
Yeah.
that's what Daniel predicts, and it's coming. Uh, when we see all the bad trends, like, did you know that the 18 to 20, I think a 28-year-old demographics voted for the far left progressives to a high extent? That tells you that our future is not too bright.
Well, maybe they'll get jobs someday, though.
Yeah, they'll start paying taxes, and then they'll think differently.
Yeah, when you start
Now,
worrying about your own business, you realize, oh, well, wait a minute.
could be. That is true. A lot of people are really leftists because they don't know any better. Then they
Yeah.
get in their 40s and have kids and families.
Yeah.
Well, I see it a little differently now.
We're
That's
Yeah,
true.
it sounds nice. If it works, it doesn't work. Sorry, guys. Yeah.
we're watching
Sorry.
a demonstration in how quickly a country can go from almost peak strength and power and prosperity to utter destruction in a short period of time. I mean, a few years ago, I was doing great. Everybody, the economy was screaming. We had no inflation to speak of. Everything was great. Every market was just growing, and then in less than 2 years, it's all come crumbling down to a mess.
Yeah.
It is kind of amazing, isn't it?
You couldn't do it unless you was intentional. That couldn't happen by accident. It's being torn down intentionally.
So from there, I think it's interesting to think about the value of somebody like Daniel. I mean, the fact that he was at the top of the Babylonian Empire. Here come the Persians and the Medes. Wipe them out. They take over. But Daniel, you can stay. Like, you can stay. You're going to help us too. You're going to continue helping us administer that. Like, he must have had, enormous character and ability, and it must have been very obvious from the beginning to keep one of the uppity people from a regime that you brutally toppled. That's a really interesting scenario to be in, from him to live from one into the other and maintain his influence, or even grow in influence. I mean, with what he managed, with his influence with the king of Persia and all that. It's remarkable.
It is remarkable. And I see one reason why the Babylonians would pick foreigners who are very gifted and talented. They didn't have to worry about them leading a revolt against them because they knew their people weren't going to follow a foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the Persians were smart enough to figure that out. And they must have heard a really good Daniel's great reputation, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. And maybe the stories of the hand on the wall, and he interpreted the writing and all that, and said, they're coming in. That maybe that encouraged them, right?
Yeah, it's amazing, and it also shows when God is with you. There's a song I like called "God's Got My Back," and I'm not saying it's a great song, but it's peppy anyway. But when God is with you, He can make all kinds of things work out for you. And Daniel's a great example of it. And,
yeah, right. Didn't Nebuchadnezzar, he acknowledged, God after his ups and downs and all that stuff, and Cyrus as well. And, the influence of Daniel being right there next to them, that's got to be the catalyst in those events.
And it doesn't happen immediately, but shortly thereafter, I'm not sure how much Daniel had influenced it, but when you read Ezra, Nehemiah, and some of the minor prophets, Cyrus and the other guy after him, 20 years later, cooperated. They made that part of the Persian Empire supply the Jews with the materials they needed to rebuild the walls, and mostly to rebuild the temple, which shocked the Arabs and the Samaritans in the area. They were upset about it.
Yeah.
That's great favor that God gave them, and probably, well, obviously Ezra and Nehemiah were part of it, but also I think Daniel was too.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I know we're at the end of the program. I just noticed one thing in world events that might be worth noting. I mean, obviously America's headed in a bad direction, and we can all see that. But China eased back on some of their restrictions because of demonstrations. I thought the Chinese would just, and they did have tanks rolling into big cities and they were crushing them. But maybe the size of the demonstrations were such that the Chinese felt they had to give a little bit. Isn't that kind of amazing? Don't you think so, Ken?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe it's genuine. I don't know, but they were getting a lot of pushback. I know that. I was watching the videos, and it was. I mean, no matter what the Chi-Coms do, when you got a population of 1.5 billion people, and even if all they have is pitchforks and torches, it can be formidable. So sometimes you got to back off a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, here's a theory. Backing off can either ease tensions and all the problems are solved, or, this is the other or is, it will encourage the demonstrators that why don't we go all the way and get rid of Xi Jinping? Because a lot of them, and 5 years ago, they wouldn't have dare said that. But I heard now, and by the way, our company Google is helping the communist Chinese put down these revolts.
And Apple.
And that ought to be a crime, or at least they should be embarrassed. But I saw some videos where they were chanting something like Xi has got to go, or something like that. Did anybody hear those?
Saw some of that. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I could see there's the practical aspect of they've been knocking out their own kneecaps with their COVID restrictions over there in China for years now. I mean, they've been hampering themselves as bad as they have been the rest of the world, shutting down their own production and, bottling their people up. They can't get to work. I mean, that's hurting their economy big time as well. So even if they've, maybe there's no easy way for them to relax their zero COVID policy. Maybe this gives them a little bit of room to dial it back.
Well, they're
accommodating the people. I don't know. That's wild speculation. They need their economy to be up and running again, though. They need that.
Well, their entire economy is hanging by a thread right now with all their banking issues they have over there. I mean, they were shutting down banks and confiscating people's money. I mean, when you weld your people into their apartment building and then it burns to the ground, that gets people upset. Because if you're going to die anyway, you might as well throw everything you got at the regime and try and take it down in the meantime.
So I think the Chinese probably did the smart thing to back off. The question is, what will happen in the future? By the way, I know everybody's happy if gasoline prices are declining. Two reasons I heard why. One is China is the world's biggest buyer of oil. The Chinese economy has dropped so much that world demand and some other economies have declined too. The world demand for oil has declined. And even in America, according to what I heard, people are driving less. I don't think it's because our economy is slowing down. This is my opinion. See what you think, Ken. You might have more insight. Because of high gas prices, people have found a way to combine shopping trips so you drive less frequently.
Well, not only that, I mean, the volume is down. It has been dropping. I mean, it came up after the end of the COVID deal, but its volume is off. And margin is up and volume is off, but I don't see it getting back up till spring. We've had a mild winter so far. We haven't seen bitter cold yet, and it's beginning middle of December, so that helps.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically it. I mean, it's and people are driving less. They're just driving less. They're not going as often and doing as much, and it's just way I don't. It's just
I read a few days ago about I think Venezuela's opening back up a little bit, but it's in a limited sort of sense. We got to make a bunch of rules, I guess, to allow ourselves to do it. I believe it's Chevron that's technically owed a lot of money out of Venezuela, like 800 billion or something like that. And so they're in the first stages of being allowed to operate there again, but not for a profit, only to recoup their losses, for the time being. But that's gonna take a while. So there's some extra input. I feel like I read that OPEC upped their output a little bit here in this last week or so, but I can't say that. I can't say that for sure.
So that's good. At least it's good for America. We'll have to see what happens in Europe. Europe is still, if they have a bad winter, I know they stored up all their coal and stuff for a tough winter, but how long that will last if things go badly. But maybe they'll get through this winter without any great crisis. We'll have to kind of wait and see. But it looks like demand is down, means the world economy is slowing down. So that's not all good news.
No. And we could face troubles here with our government. I mean, is all this revelation coming? Well, it's all this confirmation coming out of Twitter. Is that they're revealing? I mean, they did tonight. They dumped a bunch of information, and they're going to do it in the next 2 nights as well. And is just telling how corrupt. It's just confirming how corrupt it is, and that could cause some major problems for our government to operate. I mean, if people get upset enough about the revelations that are coming out, that could cause issues back home.
I'm surprised if people don't already know this is going on.
We know, but there's a difference between knowing and confirmation.
Yeah. Or that it's not believed or wasn't thought to be on that kind of scale or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe not quite that corrupt. I don't know.
But
the only good thing for the administration, I'm told, the legacy media is not covering it.
They're not touching it, but eventually it's going to be overwhelming. They look like complete fools for just not touching it. I mean, it's that bad. I mean, it's bad. I need them to name names. I want to hear names. This person said to that person, and that I'd rather. I mean, we're getting names of Twitter employees, but we're not getting names out of the government all that much. And I don't know if that's by design or what. I don't think what's his name's being all that transparent, but I'd like to see it all. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I don't care who did it. I want to see it.
Just want to know what happened. Yeah.
Me three.
Yep. It's not, and it ain't looking good at all. You'll hear more. I mean, you'll hear it, your podcast, or whatever you listen to, or maybe Fox will cover some of it, but it'll get out there. Definitely Bongino and those kind of guys cover this stuff.
Oh yeah, I heard the other night they really cracked down on Bongino on Twitter in the past.
Oh, they did. Oh,
Did
yeah.
they?
Well, we knew it. Like Michael said, we already knew this stuff, but it wasn't confirmed. Now we're seeing the conversation between the Twitters and the employees at Twitter, and then versus government agencies helping them with making these decisions, and it's really sick, is what it is.
When these big media companies of ours, technically American companies, when they go overseas, they do business in foreign countries. This is the price of doing business, controlling what's going to be in and what's going to be allowed. That just goes with the territory. I feel like, to me, that's why it doesn't seem all that shocking. Twitter specifically, a year or so ago, there's a big dust up in India, and it's about taking down things from the opposition and, not allowing this to stand, and then back and forth and big fights and fines and things like that. And that's what that's the price of doing business a lot of other places in the world for these companies. And if that's the status quo everywhere, I mean, what makes you think it's different, here?
Yeah, it's
what they do. They're set up for it.
Looks bad. One more thing I saw on Tucker, nobody else has mentioned it, but the Ukrainian government is cracking down on the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church.
Oh yeah.
Really?
That, to me, see, religion and prophecy are related. I'm not sure how, but somehow something tells me that is significant if it continues. Any thoughts, Michael or Ken?
The Orthodox Church, I know that there have been some splits and things like that over there. The Russian Orthodox Church has not been allowed inside of Ukraine for some while. The Russian Orthodox Church has split from Orthodoxy in general a while back, and I think it has something to do with these types of issues in Ukraine, or who they're supporting, or the loyalty of the Russian Orthodox Church to their own government, and I don't know exactly how that breaks down over there at this point in time. But there are, national type churches in a lot of these places. We don't really think of things that way, but like, the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, and it may be as small of a difference as, using 2 or 3 fingers to cross yourself, and that makes you Orthodox or an old believer or some other thing that's foreign to us. But there are those divisions, definitely.
But my only point is, in a war, you go against I assume it's the biggest church in Ukraine. I make that assumption. It may not be, but it would seem like it would be. Doesn't that tend to make you worried that something must be wrong somewhere in Ukraine, or something is going on that you wouldn't expect? I have no idea. By the way, we're going to talk about the split in the Roman Empire, the 2 legs, and the religious split, probably next week or the week after next. And I want to encourage people. There's a lot more, even much more exciting details that we're going to be going through in the next, hopefully, 3 episodes. And the computers will not let us down.
I wouldn't go with that one, but who knows? All right. Well, now I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being on tonight, and everyone who's joining. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Sabbath, and we will see you all back here again next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Sabbath. Good night.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.